Council. Our city historian, Mr. Dimmler, would you do us the honor of leading the Pledge of Allegiance? All please rise.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
City Clerk, can I get a roll call?
Councilmember Harrington.
Present.
Councilmember Cook.
Here.
Councilmember Agramonte.
Here.
Mayor Henley.
Here.
Thank you.
Item number 1 is comments from the public. At this time, members of the public may comment on any item not appearing on the agenda. It is recommended that you keep your comments to 3 minutes or less. Under state law, matters presented under this item cannot be discussed or acted upon by the City Council at this time. For items appearing on the agenda, the public will be invited to make comments at the time the item comes up for council consideration. Upon being acknowledged, please step to the podium and speak into the microphone. Begin by stating and spelling your name.
Good evening, Madam Mayor and Council. My name is Bob Felder, F-E-L-D-E-R, 5th Street East, Sonoma. I'm here tonight because with the significant number of projects due to come before the Planning Commission in the near term, I'm very, very concerned with the number of vacancies that exist on that commission right now. And in fact, we have just had another commissioner who has his term has expired, and since there has been no nomination for reappointment with ratification by the council as required by the municipal code, that means we now have 3 vacancies on the Planning Commission. And to me, this is a very dangerous ground for us to be entering into for the good of our community. I think we need to move ahead with further appointments to the Planning Commission without waiting for discussion to talk about how we might want to do this in the future. I think the time is now. We need to act, and I hope that the council will take this seriously and act on it to fill these vacancies. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, Cindy Scarborough. I would agree with what Bob Felder has just said. I too am concerned about the lack of decision makers on the Planning Commission, and I know it's a challenging situation. 2 other comments. Congratulations, Madam Mayor, on your recent recognition of 40 under 40. And thank you, Madam Mayor, for reaching out to Habitat for Humanity and Vintage House to come together to look at ways we can help identify and serve seniors who need assistance in order to stay in their own homes with home modification and renovations. Thank you.
Thank you. Any further public comment? Seeing none, I'll bring it back. I believe we do have 1 meeting dedication.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I'm dedicating this evening to Reverend David E. McCracken from the First Congregational Church. He was ordained in 1962, and as I said, he was with the he was a Reverend, First Congregational Church, 1984 to 2004. He was also very involved with Fish, SOS, and Wilmar. He leaves behind his wife, Judy, of 27 years, children Beth, Philip, and Jamie.
Thank you. Item 3A, proclamation declaring May as Older American Month in the city of Sonoma. I believe Cynthia Scarborough will be receiving this proclamation. If you could meet me at the podium. City of Sonoma Proclamation, Older Americans Month, May 2017. Whereas nearly 1 in 3 residents in Sonoma are 60 and better, and whereas Vintage House Senior Center is dedicated to providing Sonoma Valley with activities and services for its 55 and up population that enhance dignity, promote well-being and independence, and encourage participation in community life. And whereas Vintage House serves approximately 2,000 individuals each year within a modest budget of $743,000 through the dedicated efforts of 6 core staff supported by over 300 active volunteers, donating 11,000 or more hours annually. And whereas Vintage House has and will continue to respond to the changing needs of rapidly changing senior demographic. Now, therefore, I, Rachel Hunley, Mayor of the City of Sonoma, do hereby declare the month of May 2017 as Older Americans Month in the City of Sonoma, and encourage all Sonoma residents to join me in recognizing Vintage House for its pivotal role in promoting the welfare of our burgeoning elder population. Would you like to say a few words?
Thank you. This one. The proclamation says almost 1 in 3 Sonoma City residents are 60 and above. The numbers are actually 25% of the county, 28% of the valley, and 33% of the city of Sonoma. We are an older community. And in partnership with the city and many others, we at Vintage House are delighted to be able to provide an increasing array of services to help seniors meet the changing realities of living longer. What it means to be a senior today is very different than what it meant in the past, and it's continuing to change. And we're helping meet the seniors are today are living longer, are insisting on more resources in order to stay healthy and alive and active in the community more independently. And they are insisting on the resources that will help them do that. With the city's help, we're able to do that, and with the help of those over 300 volunteers. Just want to very briefly mention a few activities coming up this month. On Friday the 26th, the Vintage House Singers, an amazing group of voices, are providing a free concert from 2 to 4 in the afternoon. On Thursday the 18th, in conjunction with Sonoma County Regional Parks, there is a free outdoor Live Out Loud. The theme that the county has, that the Federal Administration on Aging has put up this year for Older Americans Month is Live Out Loud. And the county regional parks are doing a Live Out Loud, Live Outside event at Spring Lake, in which our own Ted Elliott will be interviewed by Carol Hart. Then, beginning on Thursdays this month, every Thursday from 10 to 11:30, we have a free lecture series on holistic health in the golden years. We have ukulele is very popular at Vintage House, and we have a brand new beginning class starting this Friday. We have a brand new beginning Italian class because Italian is also very popular, and a brand new yoga class, leaving us with 4 yoga classes every week now. A trip to see Monet, the Monet exhibit in the city, on Saturday the 20th, and Festa Italiana, which celebrates all things Italian, on Friday the 12th, and then again in June on Friday the 9th. Thank you very much for your support, and I would like to pass one of these out to each City Council member, the 2017 Resource Guide of Senior Services and Resources, and one also for the City Manager and City Clerk. And note that this year for the first time, there are 2 pages of services specifically for LGBT seniors. Thank you.
More proclamation, and I see Mr. Petlock in the audience. Is Ken joining us today? All right, instead we have Mr. Metzer. City of Sonoma proclamation for Bike to Work Month, May 2017. Whereas commuting by bike has proven economic, environmental, and health benefits for individuals and communities, and whereas the City of Sonoma is committed to reducing its greenhouse gas emissions to 1990 levels by 2020, and by 2050 to reduce greenhouse gas emissions to 80% below 1990 levels, and whereas widespread bike commuting helps to reduce traffic congestion and the associated greenhouse gas emissions. And whereas The City of Sonoma is committed to promoting and supporting a culture that embraces multimodal transportation, including bicycling. And whereas National Bike Month in May and Bike to Work Day, which is May 11th, coordinated throughout Sonoma County by Sonoma County Bicycle Coalition in partnership with dozens of local government, business, and organizational partners, is increasingly successful in its efforts to encourage local residents to try biking for transportation. And whereas the all May long Team Bike Challenge is a fun and supportive contest that helps local residents become regular bike commuters. Now therefore I, Rachel Hunley, Mayor of the City of Sonoma, do hereby proclaim the City of Sonoma's support for National Bike Month and do hereby proclaim Thursday, May 11th, Bike to Work Day, and encourage all citizens of the City of Sonoma to participate by trying bike commuting, joining the Team Bike Challenge, and celebrating these events.
Thank you.
Would you like to say something?
Sure. So for those who don't know me, I think most of you do, I'm Matt Metzler. I'm on the Community Services and Environmental Commission. I've been doing a lot with the commission to try and encourage bicycling, both for the reasons stated in the proclamation to reduce our greenhouse gases, and also part of the duty of the Community Services and Environmental Commission is to oversee special events. And we're really working at looking what we can do to encourage people to bicycle to special events to reduce the gridlock traffic around the plaza during special events. And so I've worked with Dan on trying to find location for more bike racks, bike parking around the plaza. And I've been working, we just got the email a couple days ago that Councilmember Agramonte is going to be going to a meeting. I believe if I don't have, correct me if the dates or the names of the agencies are wrong, but I think it's next week, the Sonoma County Transportation Agency. We're finally going to put in for a grant that looks hopeful to pay for the Newcomb Street Bike Bridge, which I've been going to meetings about since 2007. I looked at my calendar. The first meeting about that was 2007. So hopefully, my kids are grown and gone, but there's another whole generation of kids in the neighborhood who will be able to bike to Adele Harrison and the high school and just bike around the neighborhood without having to dodge the traffic on First Street West. So we're really looking forward to that. And I just wanted to thank the council for supporting bike activities around town. And I think, Chris, you know more about what's going on with the Bike to Work Day.
Sure.
If you want to speak to that.
So this will be the 8th year that at least I've been involved with the Community Service and Environment Commission sponsoring Bike to Work Day. And so this year, our commission will be sponsoring a station out at the corner of the bike path and Highway 12, where we've been all but, I think last year and the year before, where we were over here in Depot Park. Also, there'll be a Energizer station at the Sonoma Mission Inn, and I believe at MacArthur Place. So even if you just want to stop by and get a little swag and maybe a cup of coffee or some goodies on your way to work, that'd be great. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Next up, we have the consent calendar. All items listed on the consent calendar are considered to be routine and will be acted upon by a single motion. There will be no separate discussion of these items unless members of the council, staff, or public request specific items to be removed for separate action. At this time, council may decide to change the order of the agenda. And if you would like to make comments on an item but not pull it, we'll do it at the public comment section in the beginning. Anything from council? All right, seeing none, I'll take it out to the public for public comment.
Always confused. Robert Demler, First Street West, Sonoma. Always confused about procedure, even after 20 years here. Yes. Banners. I want to thank everyone on the city staff who've been very helpful for helping shepherd this through and helping us get approvals and so forth. I think you saw these last commission meeting. These are the banners. They were approved the next day after your meeting at the Design Review Historic Preservation, and I'm not addressing the crowd, but the banners. They're really wonderful. They were designed by Lisa Carlson, who is a graphic artist in our town. She's very talented. This has to do with Pueblo Day break, it has not to do with the Vallejo Monument. That was done before. The Vallejo Monument Committee is contributing 5 banners to be across the northern perimeters of the plaza on Spain Street to set a festive note for the dedication of the statue on the 24th of June, which just happens to be Pueblo Day. Somehow it worked out. I've been also speaking with the state parks folks, and they will, again, as they did last year, have activities, mainly for children, but activities at the barracks the same day for Pueblo Day as well. And I've also been speaking with Robert Lee, who's the marketing manager, whatever, at the IT, about rustling up some interest from the merchants, and we're going to have a spread in the IT the week before. So I'd like to build Pueblo Day each year a little more. La Luz is interested in this. Unfortunately, Juan Hernandez's father died, and he was out of commission for a month, and so we're going to pick it up for next year, but we want to do some educational activities about the history of California, early California, so that the Hispanic students will come not only to appreciate but understand and know what has come before them, and which is a lot and wonderful history. So as they say, each year we build more and more for Pueblo Day, and the request tonight is for the other 3 parameters of the plaza to have these banners around, and then they will, of course, if the city agrees to this, those 16 will be yours, and the 5 that are contributed by the Vallejo Committee will be given to the city as well, so they can be reused as we can schedule each year. So I wanted to say thank you very much.
Thank you.
I will answer any questions should anybody have any.
Thank you. Any further public comment on the consent calendar? Seeing none, I'll bring it back to the council for discussion and an action.
If there are no comments or questions, Madam Mayor, I'd like to move to approve, I'll ask first if there's no questions or, I'd like to move to approve the consent agenda 4A, 4B, 4C, and 4D.
I'll second.
All right, we have a first, we have a second. Can I get a roll call vote, please?
Councilmember Harrington?
Aye.
Councilmember Agramonte?
Aye.
Councilmember Cook?
Aye.
And Mayor Hunley.
Aye.
Thank you.
Item 6A, discussion, consideration, and possible action to establish a public educational and government access PEG channel fee and introduce and conduct first reading of an ordinance establishing regulations for state video franchise. I will turn it over to our city manager.
Great. Good evening, Mayor Hunley and Council. So the item before you is basically an introduction and first reading of an ordinance. And this is going to repeal a current section of the city's municipal code, section 5.2, which outlines what used to be called the community antenna television systems. So the world changes. And in basically 2006, the federal government approved what's called DIVCA, and I'll use that terminology. It's the Digital Infrastructure and Video Competition Act. And subsequently after that, the state also passed regulations. And what it did is it basically changed the way cities regulate cable television. So we have not updated this ordinance. So what's before you tonight is to really update the city's ordinance to align with state and federal law that was done some time ago. And in addition, it also adds what's called a 1% fee that will provide capital funding to our PEG channel franchisor. This is the, not really franchisor, this is our the company that we have a contract with to basically manage the city's PEG channels. And PEG stands for Public Educational and Government Channels. And for some time, that has been a nonprofit called Common Bond. And at our next meeting, we'll come forward with a change to have that recommend that we move with a new nonprofit. It's kind of transitioning Common Bond into this new Sonoma Valley Community Communications, Bob Taylor and some of his groups. So a new nonprofit that's going to be working in that area. So meanwhile, we need to kind of update this ordinance. And so there's two pieces. Again, there's the ordinance update. And part of what the federal and state law did, cities used to have the franchise, and we regulated cable TV's franchise, and we took complaints from the public, et cetera. With these changes that were done in 2006, 2007, that really has changed. So the state now is a franchise. The state regulates. We're not in the regulation of those businesses anymore. We still do receive a 5% franchise fee that comes to the city from firms that do have cable TV. And then the ordinance also includes a new 1%, which will be somewhere in the neighborhood of $25,000 to $30,000 that would then go to the future SVCC, who is actually overseeing and managing those PEG channels on behalf of the city, and that can be used for capital equipment. So that really, this is an introduction of the ordinance to you. It's kind of a cleanup item and a new way to try to support SVCC and Channel 27, which provides a lot of programming from our community. Some cities have 3 different channels, one for public, which people can go in and record their own shows, et cetera, one for education, one for government. We actually have one channel currently. We have a second kind of on hold, and I think there's some interest from SVCC in the future to program that. But at this point, you know, as you all know from watching it, there's a lot of our channels, our meetings are on their school board, planning commission, hospital board, a lot of sport channels, different community events. So it definitely is part of, you know, creating that communication and media outlet about the things that are happening in our town. So this is really the legislative piece behind that, and then we'll talk more about a contract with SVCC at the next meeting. So happy to answer any questions.
Do we have any council questions? Seeing none, I will take it out to the public for public comment. Seeing none, I will bring it back to the council for discussion and an action.
I just have a quick question. Who is on, for the participants in Common Bond or the leadership, who are those people?
To be honest, I don't know all the folks that were involved. Bob is here. Mr. Taylor might pop up to the front. My understanding is the Common Bond nonprofit is ready to transition out. This is a very amicable relationship, but he can probably speak to some of the folks that were on the Common Bond.
Yes. The question is what?
Oh, just who would you be taking over from?
Well, Common Bond Foundation is, they used to own the KSVY or be the licensee for KSVY, and they were contracted with the city to run SVTV. We have since acquired the license from the FCC and are attempting to, and it's been a friendly transition.
Perhaps someone would like to make a motion?
I'll make a motion. To approve an ordinance of the City Council of the City of Sonoma repealing and reenacting Chapter 5.20 of the Sonoma Municipal Code to implement regulations for state video franchise holders, including a fee for public, education, and governmental channel access in accordance with the Digital Infrastructure and Video Competition Act.
Maybe just a friendly amendment motion. So the council's not approving this ordinance tonight. You're introducing it for first reading, and we'll come back on the 15th.
Yes, thank you so much.
So, second?
You do. I'll second.
Thank you.
All right, I have a first, I have a second. Can I have a roll call, please?
Councilmember Harrington? Aye. Councilmember Cook? Aye. Councilmember Agramonte?
Aye.
Mayor Henley?
Aye.
Thank you.
All right. Item 7A, discussion, consideration, and possible action to adopt a resolution supporting Sonoma Valley Healthcare District's Measure E parcel tax. City Manager?
Okay. So, council, at your last meeting, you had some representatives from the hospital asking you to take this action tonight and approve a resolution to support the Sonoma Valley Healthcare District's Measure E, which will be on the parcel tax. At the end of that public comment, there was a an appropriate action and motion by the council in agreement to place this on tonight's agenda. That was in full compliance with the Brown Act, and so we have now brought this forward back to you for action. So there is a resolution if the council would like to support. So with that, I'll turn it back to the pleasure of the council.
Thank you. Are there any council questions? Seeing none, I'll take it to the public for public comment.
My name's Peter Holhorst, and this is Mike Nugent. And we were here 2 weeks ago and appreciate the fact that you've put this on the agenda for tonight. We are, I guess, 5 weeks away from the election, and it's extremely important for the hospital that this parcel tax passes. If it does not pass, in the next fiscal year, we will receive no parcel tax revenue because we will miss the entire tax cycle. And the size of the difference is that's $3.8 million that the hospital will not have that it's in the operations for that year. That's equivalent to 10% of the total salaries of all the hospital employees. So it's hard for me to imagine how we could operate without it. The other problem to it is if it fails this time, the chances of being able to get the donations and the energy of people anytime in 2018 or 2019 to run another campaign to pass a subsequent parcel tax for any money would be extremely difficult. So we're as you can see from driving around town right now, we're conducting a very visible campaign. We have signs wherever we have been able to talk to people that are supporters. There are a lot of people that are supporting that don't have signs, but we've at this point put out 350 small signs, and we've put out 20 of the great big huge signs, which unfortunately none of those are in the city of Sonoma because your ordinance won't allow us to have one that size. If you would like to go ahead and violate the Brown Act and change your ordinance tonight, we can have some on the plaza, but I don't think that'll work. But I appreciate your support, and we will do everything possible in the next 4 weeks to get it to pass.
Thank you.
Thank you. I'm Mike Nugent. There was a slight misstatement made earlier. I'm not part of the hospital community any longer. I'm a citizen. But for 17 years, I sat up there as a member of the council and the chairman. You know, it wouldn't be a public meeting in Sonoma if somebody didn't bring up the Brown Act. So I'm really happy that's come up. You know, I'm reminded of Benjamin Franklin. You know, was at the Constitutional Convention in Philadelphia in 1787, and you know that was a closed meeting. There was no reporting out of it. So at the end of as they were leaving Independence Hall, a citizen asked Dr. Franklin, what type of government shall we have? Will it be a monarchy? And he said, it will be a republic, madam, if you can keep it. Well, what's this all about? This is about our hospital. This is about the beating heart in each one of our chests and our children and our parents. And I don't have a slogan, but if you want a hospital, you can keep it. That's the opportunity. And thank you very much, Mayor and members of the council, for your consideration.
Thank you.
Just gonna put this down here. No. Josette Brozeicher, 1110 Loma Court. Is this working for me? Okay. First, let me say I'm voting yes on Measure E. I'm here tonight because I believe this measure may be defeated again. And I think keeping a hospital and ER in the Valley is imperative for our community. There are many people who are vehemently opposed to extending and raising the parcel tax. They were very vocal and influential the first time around, and more so now. Our neighborhood blog, Next Door, and online comments in responses to pieces published in the IT and Sun bear this out. Because of this, I'm here to ask the City Council to sponsor a town hall or a forum on Measure E. Written questions could be submitted before and at the forum, and it should have a moderator. The hospital board and management of the hospital, including the CEO, should all be there to answer public questions. There's a ton of misinformation floating around right now. Much of it has created the impression that the hospital is being run like a luxury resort by its management, and by voting no, the voters are sending a message to clean this up. There are also some that feel it is not completely necessary to have a hospital or ER close by. But most of the sentiment, the no sentiment, seems to come from the financial mismanagement perception. By having a well-publicized town hall as soon as possible, it will get the issues and truth out in the open well ahead of the election and allow the media to publish information for voters to read. Thank you for your time, and I hope that the hospital board members tonight will support and encourage this idea. Time is short. I would encourage you to do this ASAP as if we want the measure to pass, because it's less than a month till the election. So thanks.
Thank you.
Hi, David Eicher, 1110 Loma Court. I've gone to the emergency room a couple of times, and luckily nothing really terrible, just kidney stone. But the last time the pain presented itself differently, and I thought could be appendicitis or something like that. And so, luckily, we had something that was close by, and that's great. And I'm going to date myself here with a couple of sayings. One is, don't be penny wise and pound foolish. A lot of people saying, oh, the parcel tax I have to pay this $255 every year, but they don't realize that the property values will drop probably much more than that over the next 10 years if you don't have a hospital in the community. So they're saving some money every year, but then when they go to sell a property, they're going to get a lot less because there's no hospital. And the other is, it's just don't throw the baby out with the bathwater. If there are any issues, which I haven't seen any, although there's rumors of them floating around, they should be addressed, and I believe they will be. But just to say, well, we've got a little bit problem over here, so let's just throw the baby out with the bathwater, and that's not the right thing to do. So, thank you.
Thank you.
Robert Demler, Sonoma. I have a personal opinion about people who speak on every issue, and I don't intend to do that, but I would be very remiss if I didn't say how much I appreciate our little hospital in our little town. It saved my life twice. In 2011 because of a nut allergy gone bad, and on Good Friday this year because of a pulmonary embolism. And I am very, very grateful to the staff. They're all wonderful there and very attentive and loving and sweet, and they know what they're doing. And I am very happy to pay whatever it is to keep that hospital in this town. And I would appreciate your supporting this resolution. And I would appreciate each of you. I know you have lists of people for your own benefit when you run for election. Please call them and tell them to vote, and tell their neighbors and friends to vote for this. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
I could change my name so I could be legal and talking again. If you are interested in the possibility of having a town meeting, we would be, the hospital board would be more than happy to go ahead and participate.
Great, thank you. Any further public comment on this item? Seeing none, I'm going to bring it back to the council for discussion and action. Councilmember Harrington.
Oh. Well, I have a yes on E sign in my yard, thanks to John Kelly for dropping it off and the wonderful volunteers for getting that all together. I just wanted to say that I had the opportunity to attend the Yes on E steering committee and listen, and to thank the members of the community and the board of the hospital for putting so much work in. They are putting in a tremendous amount of energy to talk to people one by one, a real grassroots campaign to educate people about the value and importance of our hospital, and I think it's tremendous, the effort that's gone into it, and thank you very much.
Councilmember Cook.
Well, I'll go ahead and make a motion. I do support this. I'd like to make a motion to adopt the resolution supporting Sonoma Valley Health Care District's Measure E partial tax.
And I'd like to make a second on that. And I have to say, as a former healthcare district board member, I know how important this passage is. You know, it's an interesting industry because, you know, when we all have our household expenses, we know that we have a certain salary that comes in and we're able to cover it. Well, unfortunately for the hospital industry, it's far more difficult because if you give services for a certain amount, Medicare, Medi-Cal don't actually think that you should get that amount. So the hospital always has to make up the difference. And the other thing to remember is everyone who walks in that door gets served. And I think that's really important. My family and I I've been a Kaiser member, I think, since I was 14. My husband and my son are also Kaiser members, but we've used the emergency this year, and I hope we don't use it too often, but I know that it's there. And it's so important to know that it's here because that's a pretty good ride when you're not well, going to Napa, Santa Rosa, or San Rafael. So I really am excited, and I would encourage people when they have time to look at the Follett, F-O-L-L-E-T-T novels. And it goes back to the 14th century when carpenters were building the cathedrals, just like the hospital. It's the very same thing. The carpenters have typhoid and they all die. So then they have to hire new carpenters. The sheriff raises the tariff on the bridge. So they have to do something like that. So it's the same thing. We all feel that we have expenditures and we pay them. But for the hospital, it's a very different business. I put it right up there with school districts. So I'm very proud to say that I support Measure E.
Pillars of the Earth by Ken Follett is one of my favorite books. It's brilliant. I know that this is an uncertain time for the healthcare industry, and I don't want to live in a city without a hospital. And I'm so thankful of everyone that's working to administer the hospital and support the hospital. And when I got a call from someone asking me if I'd support Measure E, I was really happy that there's so many people out there on the ground. So I personally endorsed it also, if there's anything else I can do to help you all, but I'm happy to be voting for this resolution as well, and I think we can get a roll call vote.
Councilmember Harrington? Aye. Councilmember Agramonte?
Aye.
Councilmember Cook?
Aye.
Mayor Hunley?
Aye.
Thank you.
Item 7B, receive update on Sonoma County Safe Drug and Sharps Disposal Model Ordinance. No action, information only.
Right.
And I think we'll start with our city manager.
Yeah, so Mayor, Council, and Community like to introduce Brian Vaughn. Brian is with the Department of Health Services, and this is really a kind of a little bit of a work session. We're going to provide an overview to you about the Extended Producer Responsibility and Safe Medicine Disposal Ordinance. This has been a collaboration going on for quite some time. Brian has a PowerPoint he'll go through with you, and then looking for some initial feedback, and we see that this will be coming back kind of summer or fall for council final action. So with that, I'll turn to Brian.
Great, thank you. Thank you, Mayor Hunley, members of the council and staff. As City Manager Capriola mentioned, I'm here to just provide an update on the collaboration that we started probably more than a year ago. You had someone out here from the Russian River Watershed Association to discuss potential options for safe med disposal, particularly around what's known as an extended producer responsibility ordinance. So I'm here to provide an update on that work group, and as was mentioned, to get some feedback with you before we go back to the County Board of Supervisors to adopt a resolution or an ordinance, at least in the unincorporated area. So just a little bit of background on safe medicine disposal. There's a couple of reasons why the health department is obviously interested in the disposal of medicines. There's the environmental issues, right, of polluted water and waterways, so keeping unused medications, particularly concentrated medications, out of the waterways. And also there's a number of public health concerns as well, particularly around controlled substances, prescription medications, painkillers, or prescriptions of abuse, getting those also out of the household and disposed of properly. We know that there's any number of, every year, I believe it's 1 in 4 residents in the county get some prescription for a painkiller. And so being able to dispose of that. I'm sure everyone here has some unused medication in their cupboard, so making that easy and efficient to get rid of is really the goal of this, to keep it out of the hands of people and to keep it out of our environment. So since 2007, there's been a work group that's come together to talk about safe medicine disposal. This includes the agencies you can see here listed at the table, some of the water associations, Russian River Watershed, the Sonoma County Water Agency, the Waste Management Disposal, the cities of Santa Rosa and Petaluma, and the Department of Health Services. And we've sort of been working through at least the current safe medicine program and also making recommendations for switching this to an extended producer responsibility ordinance. Just a quick highlight, kind of in the past, since 2008, since the program really got going, this is the number of pounds that have been collected in unused medication. You can see it grows, it's been growing every year, and we predict that it's going to continue to grow and that there's still a number of unused medications out there. This past, I believe a little over 6 months ago, we hit our 100,000th pound of unused medications. And as I said, that's probably just the tip of the iceberg as far as what's out there. So with the current program, we have anywhere from 16 to 19 safe medicine collection sites across the county. But as you can see from this previous slide, that we think the growth and the potential out there is much, much larger than that. But the current program faces some limitations. There's limitations around funding. Currently, the programs are funded either by the cities or by the water agencies. They pay for the bins to be placed out there or the collection events. And there's some just unsustainable growth, we think, based on what's continued to be out there and what we're seeing as far as the increase in medication that we're collecting. And then there's an issue, I think, which was discussed more than a year ago, is the responsibility of the pharmaceutical producers to take part in collecting the unused medications that they're prescribing. So as was mentioned, we think the most viable option moving forward is an extended producer responsibility, or EPR ordinance. And this calls, again, just very simply for the manufacturers of these products to participate in the end of life of these products. There are already several countries, this is not a new concept, that have EPRs, particularly for safe medicine. Canada, France, Portugal, Brazil, and Mexico all have some nationwide EPR ordinance for safe meds. And here in the United States, Alameda County was the first county in 2012 to adopt an ordinance, particularly around safe med. There's already existing EPR ordinances around car batteries, paint, that you may be familiar with when you turn in or exchange those items. So Alameda, again, was the first that was for safe medicine disposal. Probably not surprisingly, that was challenged by the pharmaceutical industry. That went all the way to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court upheld Alameda's right to be able to charge the manufacturers for disposal of safe medicines. That, I believe, was in 2015. So since then, a number of counties in California have adopted safe medicine EPR. You can see, I think there's about 9 now, including some cities in Santa Cruz. And this continues every month. We're hearing of more and more counties that are adopting safe medicine EPR ordinance. So the benefits of having a local ordinance, first and foremost, it will allow us to increase the locations and geographical distribution of collection sites, so making it really easy for the residents all over Sonoma County to drop off their medicines. We also think the sites will be more secure and more convenient. They'll also be able to take more products, like controlled substances, which certain bins can't take right now. More importantly, probably, is there's a shift of cost completely to the producers of these products and not to, say, ratepayers for on your utilities who are currently covering a large portion of the costs, or taxpayers. We can shift all those costs to the producers. It'll meet that increasing demand that I mentioned, and obviously we're hopeful that it'll also reduce the number of medications that get out into the environment and also into the hands of people who may be abusing them. So just a reminder, your town, Sonoma, has had some previous efforts. In 2008, along with the county, we were actually one of the first entities to adopt a resolution supporting all EPR ordinances. And then in 2015, as I mentioned, you supported an ask by the Russian River Watershed to explore a countywide EPR ordinance for safe medicine. And that's what we're here back to report back on. So back in October, we presented the health department along with the Sonoma County Water Agency to the Board of Supervisors. We presented the concept similar to what you had heard a year before and all the councils had heard across the county. And they asked us to do a couple of things. They said to work cooperatively with local stakeholders, conduct outreach efforts to elicit feedback on a potential ordinance, and then return to the board with an ordinance proposal. We are in the second phase of that timeline right now. I think we have, I believe, 3 more local jurisdictions to solicit feedback on for the ordinance before we go back to the board, hopefully by mid-July. They will adopt an ordinance, hopefully, based on the feedback. We would like to come back then to the cities and town to either adopt a resolution signing on to the county's ordinance, or if you should so choose, do a model ordinance. And we can talk about then some responsibilities that the county is willing to take on to kind of basically oversee the whole program on behalf of the jurisdictions, if that's desired. Once the county passes it and you were to pass one or a resolution, it starts a clock that we start working with the producers to develop the program and to implement it within a year. So there's a couple of decision points we specifically want feedback on for today that would help us before we go back to our the County Board of Supervisors. There's 3 areas that have some differences between the existing ordinances out there. One is just in defining who a producer is. There's 2 definitions that I'll go over in the current ordinances across the state. One question around what products to cover. And then some standards we'd like to get some approval on ensuring convenience and universal access and what that looks like in the ordinance. So just in regards to the producers, there's kind of basically 2 definitions. There's what we call a broad definition that Alameda County actually included in their first ordinance. And then there's a little bit of a narrower definition. The differences between the 2 largely are that the broader definitions includes a class of distributors who aren't producers. So if their producers are offshore and there's a local distributor, they are required to be included in this ordinance in the broad definition. In the narrow one, that group of distributors is not included. From our best guess and our assessment is this definition actually has no bearing on any businesses in the county. It's just the 2 definitions. So the recommendation of the work group is really just to go with the broad definition. That was the original one that was litigated in Alameda and has been upheld. And so that's the recommendation. Again, it has pretty little bearing on any local businesses as far as them being included or not included based on the definition. The second issue, as I mentioned, was what products to cover. The big question really is whether we want to include Sharps needles in a potential ordinance. This is a little bit split, why you might want to include Sharps needles. There's obviously, we think, a need out there for convenient and safe disposal. There's only a limited number of sites currently across the county that provide needle disposal, most of them with a fee, with the exception of the central landfill, which isn't the most convenient place. So including Sharps would increase public convenience, and most organizations that are participating in the Safe Med, most of the businesses that are required to pay in for the medicine disposal are also the same businesses that would be required to pay in for the Sharps. So it doesn't add a whole lot of organizations or companies to that stewardship organization. Some considerations for not including it. It's not universally included in all the ordinances. It's a split. Some of the more recent ordinances are including it. Alameda actually went back and added a different ordinance that includes Sharps just this past year. And also there's some local interest. Medtronic would be included in this, in the Sharps piece of this. And so I know that they've come out against supporting inclusion of that into the ordinance. And then the third item is just around recommendations for convenient access. So what we're requiring in the ordinance, which is the most aggressive we've seen of the 9 existing, is just one, that the number of sites, there be a minimum of at least 1 site that is set up in each jurisdiction that adopts the ordinance, and then 1 additional site per 20,000 residents. Now that would be the bare minimum that the producers would be required to to maintain in the area. If a pharmacy or some other qualified area wanted to have more bins, then they would be required to put them in there as well. So that, again, that's a bare minimum. And also, pharmacies or places that didn't want to participate, we'd ask them to post a sign at the point of sale that would list the places where people could go to dispose of their medication if they choose not to participate. Here's just a kind of a breakdown of the current numbers. You can see you currently actually have 2 take-back sites already. I believe there's a Sonoma Vintage House and the Sonoma Valley Hospital. You have actually 8 potential sites based on the guidelines of the ordinance, which requires it to be a pharmacy or a hospital and clinic with a pharmacy. That's under lock and key. The minimum number of sites, again, would be 2, the same as it is now. Although, again, you could have up to 8, and if all your pharmacies wanted to participate, then they would be required to, the pharmaceutical organization would be required to put a bin in those sites. So, again, that's just a minimum, not a maximum. So just a kind of a little bit of clarification of how this works, so the roles. So the producers, just to be clear, would be responsible for paying for the new program. They'd be actually responsible for implementing the new program, and they would be responsible for advertising and promoting the locations of the collection sites. The County Department of Health Services is offering one, to just shepherd the process through, which we're doing now. 2, we'd also cover oversight of the program. So similar to as we do with restaurant inspections, we would inspect the sites on behalf of the county and the jurisdictions that wanted us to, and then we'd ensure that the ordinance is being fully enforced. We'd also work on any updates that we see to the ordinance with the stewardship organization. The cities or town who are participating have a number of options. Again, as I mentioned, there's no additional cost for participating, and there's a number of ways to get involved. Again, you could simply sign a resolution signing onto the county's ordinance, and we'd be happy to run the program on your behalf. You can sign a model ordinance and then do a memorandum of understanding for certain pieces of the ordinance. And then also, if you so wanted, you could also participate in some of the planning as well when we're looking at locations and approving the plan with the stewardship organization. So I'm going to stop there because there's the 3 decision points right here, and I'm happy to take any feedback or answer any questions you have regarding the proposal today.
All right, we'll do
Thank
council
you.
questions first, and then I have to go out to public comment before we really discuss. Do you have a question? Okay. Do you have any questions? Okay, we're going to go out to public comment.
Just a question. The producers would be responsible for the collection, and would that be through contracting with one company, and would it be the same way it's currently happening through the county water agency, or do you have any idea what that looks like? And it may not impact us at Vintage House, but if we were to continue being a reception, a site, I would want to know how that's all going to work.
If you wouldn't mind.
No, not at all. So the producers would be required to set up and operate the entire program, actually. So there are some requirements of what, at least for the medicine piece, what the sites could look like, because our proposal is to include controlled substances. So there's certain areas based on regulations by the Board of Pharmacy that can actually legally have a bin that takes those medications. Having said that, you could maintain the current site. It would have to be funded as it is now, not by the stewardship organization. We're hopeful there could be more sites in the other 8 potential sites that are in the county. So, but they run everything, and we're just there to do compliance and monitoring of the program. They pay for everything. They run the contracts. They pay for the hauling, the disposal, and we track that and ensure that they're complying.
All right, since we are still technically in public comments, and if anyone has any questions, we'll just collect them, and then at the end we'll pass them on to our speaker.
Chris Petlock, 426 Napa Road, Sonoma. So in case this wasn't clear, this is kind of a no-brainer. I'm the father of a teenager, and I'm very aware of what I have in my medicine cabinet, and I'm always kind of wondering, how do I get rid of this stuff? Knowing what I know about water, I know the best thing is not to flush it down the toilet. Hopefully everybody knows that. On a more extreme example, I'm also the son of a physician and a nurse, and when my father died, he was planning on opening after a long career opening a clinic for psychiatry. And he died, and he had thousands and thousands of pounds of pills. My poor mother didn't know what to do with them, so she flushed them. So, again, these are people in the industry. It's very important that we get it out there that, those kinds of things can be disposed of properly. Thank you.
Thank you.
Patricia Cullinan, so I'm going to join the crowd here. Two things. My cousin just had his knee operated on, and he's developmentally handicapped. They gave him a massive amount of controlled substance to take home with him. And, then you really don't need them for very long, and they're around the house. It's not a good thing. And the other thing is hormones. A lot of women take birth control pills. Apparently a lot of fish have hormones in them. So, they're little pills down that toilet. And I think that this is an educational opportunity.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Matt Metzler, 1110 Friar Creek Drive, Sonoma. I just want to concur with what people have said. I'm an environmentalist, and I read a couple books about bioaccumulation of toxins, and it's very important educationally. A lot of people aren't aware that a lot of medicines are not removed during the sewage treatment process. They can treat the sewage so that it is clean enough to drink, and the medicine that was flushed down the toilet will still be there. And there's a lot of evidence of bioaccumulation of hormone disruptor chemicals that are causing a lot of problems with wildlife, and that's how it's caused, by people flushing their medicines down the toilet. So it's really a serious problem, and I'm really glad to see the city doing something about that. Thank you.
Thank you. Any further public comment on this item? I will bring it back to the council for discussion, and we'll start with Councilmember Cook.
Well, I'll go ahead and start. When I first got on the council, this was something that we discussed. I went to the Vintage House, and thank you for what the Vintage House has been doing. To me, no-brainer is a true fact. I do believe that I like the broad definition because I want to encompass it. And I would like to keep the sharps in there, because that was something that 4 years ago when I went to the Vintage House, that was one of my biggest concerns, because I actually knew an individual who got stuck by a needle in trash. So, I'd love to see it a lot easier. And then we do have 2 sites here in Sonoma, but my question, and as far as uncontrolled substances, this does take care of that?
Yes, absolutely. And sorry, I was reminded, and I'd be remiss to mention, just in regards to your question, also as part of this ordinance, the industry is also required to develop a mail-back program as well. And there's also an option to do, if we can't place a bin in certain areas like senior centers, we can hold events for take-back events periodically throughout the year. So I forgot to mention that too.
Yeah, and I know, and I think Mark Landman was one with Cotati, Councilmember from Cotati, was one of them that started this on the steering committee. And I talked to him, and I think it makes really good sense. So I would be supporting this tonight.
Who's next? Councilmember Agamonte.
Yeah, thank you. Brian, couple of things. Let me see. So DEA, of course, does a take back once a year. I don't think that's enough. My questions earlier, I spoke with the city manager with respect to this about the secure sites. Are there regulations? I mean, because I was wondering there at the Vintage House, is that box brought into the property, or does it stay outside? I was just wondering about security.
Yeah.
And also the disposal end.
So on the front end, so with the ordinance, because we have to follow the Board of Pharmacy and some DEA regulations, they have to be in pharmacies or under the watch of a pharmacist with, I believe, has to have a lock and key for the area that these med boxes will be placed. So there's a security issue. And then the industry is required then to haul and dispose of, and we'll track that as well through our environmental health program to ensure that they're complying with that.
Thank you. What do you think? I mean, what's the likelihood of pharmacies, being involved in this?
Yeah, so what we found and we included was there's only one county that requires pharmacies to participate, and that's Santa Cruz County. We don't think we need to do that. What we think is powerful, we borrowed from San Francisco, is that if a pharmacy chooses not to participate, then they have to post a sign of their competitors who do choose to participate in the program. And we think that'll be an incentive to want to have their own bin. In addition to, I think a lot of pharmacists recognize the need and want to make that convenient for their customers who come in and getting new medications to be able to dispose of their medications.
It's kind of interesting, possibly the bag could have a tape that goes across it, so you can't actually open the medicine until you see that it says, here are the 2 sites in Sonoma. I thought that would be a great idea, and I like Councilmember Cook. I support Broad, and I support the Sharpies. I saw that in the report. And I was interested in Medtronics. I know they're from Sonoma County, and I didn't know that they have this type of, that they're part of the needle industry. I don't know because I know they deal with heart.
Yeah, they have a certain products that would be covered under the needle provisions. Mm-hmm.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
All right. Councilmember Harrington.
Just a practical question. How do you know who all the producers are so that you can make sure they contribute?
Yeah, well, we're lucky because there's 9 counties now that have this going, so it's pretty well set up by the industry. I believe there's a protocol, if you remind me of how we find out. All right, so where the pharmacies and the hospitals get their medication, they're required to send us a list, I believe, of who those wholesalers are. Yeah. So there is a process. Having said that, we can learn from the other 9 counties. It's the same organization that's setting them up, so they're pretty well organized. And I guess from our end, they have to pay for the program either way. It's actually an incentive on the stewardship organization to get more people involved on the industry side to share costs. So for us, the incentive is actually all on them to get as many people to pay in as possible.
So if they produce any of the items that are covered, they just have to pay a straight percentage. It's not like a pro rata share or anything.
Yep. And that's determined. There's a med stewardship organization that already has that pretty well hammered out.
Oh, okay. Interesting.
Yeah.
I think this is great. It really reminds me, I'm trying to think of when it was that I became aware that you weren't allowed to throw batteries out. Long time ago, many, many years ago, when we started doing battery collection and sort of people realized these aren't things you can put in your trash or leave around your house. Kind of the same idea. I support the broad definition. I think it's good that it's already faced legal scrutiny and we know it's acceptable. I absolutely think that Sharp should be covered for sure. I guess my only question about the number of sites, if there's no limit on the number of sites, why not have all 8 if those places wanted
to require all 8? Yeah, there has to be some standard. I know there has to be some minimum. We've used the most aggressive that we've seen. We know that not all the pharmacies are going to participate. So it's just setting, again, a floor. We have to, as part of the process, we have to approve the plan that's developed by the stewardship organization. But we went, it's fair to say, as aggressive as we could as far as the standards for that without probably, I think if it was everyone and required them all to, that there'd be some significant pushback. Yeah.
Okay. All right. Great. Thanks for coming.
Of course.
And what happens if, say, in Sonoma, there weren't 2 willing to do it and it was less than 2? What's the step?
Yeah. So that's a really great question. So in other counties, the stewardship organization hasn't always pushed as hard as we think they can. So we are offering as a county also to work with either the city staff or partners here to also help work with the pharmacies as well. And so we'll have an outreach too on our side if they can't cultivate that desire to have the program. If they don't have to, it'll be part of the approval plan. We'll have to ask them why they can't get to, and we can do our own surveying of the pharmacies to see if there's legitimate reasons why they can't get those 2 sites.
And so the difference between the optional city participation, is this for cities who would want to do something more strict than the county, and then they could have it more strict for those items? Or what would be the advantage of us doing something instead of just letting you guys do everything?
Yeah, so there's certain cities that like to have a little bit more control than others. Particularly, I know Santa Rosa, they usually prefer to basically do their own ordinance and then just send it on out to us when there's collaboration. I can tell you most of the cities, particularly or jurisdictions of your size are opting for the resolution. It's just the simplest. But I believe there's one, maybe two jurisdictions that are looking at just adopting their own ordinance and then doing a memorandum just to have the county implement and oversee the whole program.
And so what does, on the enforcement side by the county, does that mean you guys go into each of the places, and if they're a pharmacy that doesn't have it, you make sure they have a little sign? If they do have it, you make sure the procedures are correct?
We'll do compliance, and then we'll charge, again, similar to the restaurant inspections, we'll charge a fee to the organization for doing the compliance. We'll go out to all the pharmacies, and we'll go out to the bins. Part of it is to make sure that they're complying, but two, to check if we need to alter the ordinance. If they're filled up and they're only collecting it twice a month, then we'll work with them to collect it more frequently to make sure that that bin isn't overflowing, for example.
Cool. Well, as far as the specifics, I agree with my council members. And actually, this weekend I had someone asking me about sharps because she had a pet that had to have medication with a needle. So I'm glad that this is happening today.
Great.
So do you need any more
No,
direction from us?
I think that's great. Perfect.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Next up is item 7C, discussion, consideration, and possible action to adopt a resolution approving the joint exercise of powers agreement, creating the Sonoma Valley Groundwater Sustainability Agency and related actions, and adopt a resolution ratifying the mayor's nomination of a primary director and alternate director to the Sonoma Valley Groundwater Sustainability Agency Board of Directors. And we will start with our Public Works Director.
Thank you, Mayor and council members. So this has been a long time coming. The Sustainable Groundwater Management Act, which I'll call SGMA for short, started way back in 2015. And it's addressing declining groundwater levels in various basins, one of which is the Sonoma Valley Basin. The Sustainable Groundwater Management Act required that groundwater sustainability agencies be set up by July 1st of 2017. So that's 2 months away. And so here we are after 2 years of discussion, 3 council briefings and 3 public outreach meetings. We're ready to look at the joint powers agreement to see if we are ready to join in. I'd like to go through what the briefing that many of you may have seen before, but I'd like to do that quickly because it is a complicated process, and I think it helps to give some context as to what's really going on. So there are 3 groundwater basins that must comply with the SGMA regulations, being the Santa Rosa Plain, Petaluma Valley, and Sonoma Valley. You may notice that the actual groundwater basin of Sonoma Valley isn't all covered by this act. The act only covers what we call the alluvial basins, where groundwater can seep directly into the ground, whereas some of the higher levels have more of a volcanic rock strata. So those wouldn't necessarily be covered at the time being. As I mentioned, we have to form a GSA within 2 months from now, and then later on, maybe not hopefully not as 2022, but a groundwater sustainability plan has to be developed. Now, this would entail a very scientific plan that explores how exactly are you going to bring the groundwater level back to a level of sustainability of what you're drawing out equals what is actually going in. And then 20 years after the adoption of the plan, we have to achieve that goal. So the groundwater sustainability agencies can do a lot of various things. I won't read them off, but they can have reporting, they can measure the amount of groundwater that's being extracted, implement capital projects, and so forth. So there's quite a bit of authority that can go to the groundwater sustainability agencies. Now, there has been some concern by mostly rural residential users of whether they're going to be metered, and the answer is no. If they're taking 2 acre-feet of water or less per year, there was a lot of confusion at the last public meeting. People said, well, my lot is larger than 2 acres. No, this is 2 acre feet, which is roughly the equivalent of 650,000 gallons per year, which is a huge, huge amount. So really the likelihood of domestic well water users being metered is very minimal, and we call those de minimis users. Oh, interesting. Yeah, one of the graphics for some reason didn't show up, but of the total water used in the Sonoma Valley, about 59% is from groundwater. If I recall correctly, well, about 60% is for agriculture, and by contrast, only about 5% of the valley's groundwater goes to municipal purposes. So a lot of work went into the governance structure in Sonoma Valley and the other basins. Basically, everybody wanted local control. We didn't want our groundwater issues being decided by people in Petaluma or in Santa Rosa. So each basin would have its own GSA and groundwater sustainability plan. Here in Sonoma Valley, the state defined what was a GSA eligible agency, and we came up with 6. The City of the Valley of the Moon Water District, North Bay Water District, which is kind of an ag group that represents many farmers. The county, the Sonoma County Water Agency, and the Sonoma RCD. The Wine Grape Commission also applied, but they were deemed to be not GSA eligible. I think I'd like to note that of these 6, the North Bay Water District, County of Sonoma, Sonoma County Water Agency, and the RCD have already approved joining in on the JPA for the GSA. So the city, we are tonight, and the Valley of the Moon Water District, their board is exploring this JPA tomorrow evening. So we want to coordinate between the basins in order to save money, and here are some of the possible areas. Some of this has already occurred. We've obtained a joint $250,000 grant for data systems, and we'll continue coordinating in order to minimize costs, because a lot of the functions are very similar. Back in October of 2015, the council adopted these principles just for developing the governance options, and those were followed in the process of developing the governance. So in the Sonoma Valley GSA, only those agencies that were GSA eligible are on it. There would be one representative from each GSA eligible entity. For example, the city would just have one, Valley of the Moon would have another. And only electeds would be on the board, except in the case of the RCD, where they don't have electeds, they have appointeds. So we kept the voting as 1 vote per entity, a simple majority for the simple basic issues, a super majority for fees, regulations, and budgets, and unanimous if we have to assess any additional fees. And then there would be a periodic check-in for certain issues that might come up in the process. In some of the public outreach meetings, there came a strong feeling that there has to be a very strong advisory body, which we're calling the Advisory Committee to the GSA. And so this advisory committee is created of a number of special interests that might have an interest in the groundwater issues. So here are some of the things that the GSA board would be advised upon by the advisory committee, including fees and projects, and also various regulations. So here's the composition of the advisory body, the strong advisory body. Each of the GSA eligible entities would appoint one, including us. So I didn't want to necessarily bring that up tonight because we have to get through other things first, but at some point I think we'll come back to council with the applications for and the nomination for our chosen representative to the advisory committee. And then the GSA board will pick another 6 comprised of these interests: environmental, rural residential, business, ag, 1 at-large community rep, and then 1 at-large community rep who is preferably a hydrologist or a geologist. So probably the thing that took staff the longest to resolve were what are going to be the startup, how are we going to cover the startup costs? Because the GSA board can't immediately start assessing fees. There are a number of different things that have to be done before we can assess fees, such as actually develop a fee structure and a fee study, and also kind of discuss various budgets. Now, a lot of this will be discussed by the GSA board. Staff didn't want to get ahead of the GSA board and make those decisions for them. So some of the year 1 startup costs are as follows. In Sonoma Valley, we're looking at $470,000 just for the basic services that need to be in order to run basically a new government agency. And this compares very similarly to other GSAs that are being developed around the state. So there is no new GSA staff during the first year. Staff from the various agencies will help out. The Valley of the Moon Water District's executive director, Dan Mulrath, will serve as the interim administrator until the GSA board meets and decides whether they want to retain that structure or do something different. And then staff of the various agencies will also help out with in-kind services. So how's it split up? Well, we looked at splitting it up 6 ways, but the RCD and the North Bay Water District are really very loose organizations that are mostly funded by donations. And I think there is a pragmatic reality that we want them on there to represent agriculture. And we also have the understanding that they can't pay an equal share. So, and also the RCD is participating in 3 of the basins, and the North Bay Water District is participating in 2 basins. So after much deliberation, the idea is for them to contribute $20,000 each to this basin, and the rest would be split evenly, but then there's a shortfall resulting from the RCD and North Bay Water District not contributing a full share. And that shortfall would be funded 2/3 by the county and the water agency, and 1/3 between the city and the Valley of the Moon. So after a little bit of math, we come up with our first year contribution of $97,767. Now, over time, and I'm not saying it would be immediate, but when the GSA forms its fee structure, the full intent is for the GSA to reimburse the city at a later time. So here's the schedule of what's been going on so far. We're right at the point of finalizing the GSA structure. And then the first public hearing of the GSA will be on June 8th, coming up very soon. Again, I mentioned that many of the 6 agencies have already approved the Joint Powers Agreement. We're here, and Valley of the Moon is tomorrow. So here are the recommended actions to authorize the Joint Powers Agreement, creating the Sonoma Valley GSA, and also ratifying the mayor's nominations of David Cook as primary director and Madeline Agramonte as alternate director to the Sonoma Valley GSA Board of Directors. On the recommended council action on the first page of my staff report, on item C, I mentioned authorize the city manager to take all actions to effectuate the joint exercise of powers agreement on behalf of the city. I mistakenly include another line in there, which was from an earlier draft, including designation of the city's representative to the advisory committee, and that should not be in there. We would bring back the nominations to the full council. So with that, I'd be happy to entertain any questions or entertain a motion.
All right, do we have any council questions? Councilmember Harrington.
Do we have any estimate of the number of people that will be affected by the anticipated fees in the city of Sonoma?
We, well, first of all, the city has 8 wells, 2 inactive, so the city as a whole would be affected. We obtain about 12% of our water supply from groundwater, which isn't huge, but it's still significant. And then as far as our records go, because the records are primarily kept with the county, PRMD, but we keep a record of backflow prevention devices, which gives us a general idea that we have approximately a little over 300 well owners in the city limits.
And I mean, we can assume most of those are de minimis users?
Yes. Well, there are actually, I take that back. There are some commercial businesses, such as the Lodge is a well water user.
Oh.
And we would expect them to not be a de minimis user.
Right. Okay. So even though the city of Sonoma may be one of the largest users of well water, we will be regulating the city of Sonoma through this agency? Is that accurate?
As far as wells, I'd like to correct that. We are far from the largest groundwater user in the valley. We're probably actually the smallest.
I was just considering the amount we're proposed to contribute, which is $97,000 compared to the actual amount of groundwater that is being used in Sonoma town.
Yes, you are correct. It is a little bit disproportionate, but what we are really buying is a seat at the table for local control. We are a GSA eligible agency. There are many other groups in the valley who would like to have that control, but they aren't qualified or eligible to be such.
And so for the $97,000, we're paying that, and also the county is paying the same amount? I'm sorry.
The county is paying a little bit more. They're paying, I believe, about $117,000. Yeah, 117,233. The county and the water.
Oh, the
agency.
Valley of the Moon Water District is also paying the
Yes.
97. Thanks.
Mayor Hunley, may I also ask, I just want council to be clear, this is year 1 money, and we do anticipate that there will be another allocation for year 2 money. I just want that to be clear for council. Can you speak to that, please, Dan?
Yes, we currently estimate the budget of the GSA for year 2 at $520,000, which would equate to our share under the same formula to be about $108,000. Now, again, I want to emphasize that once the GSA is self-funding, which we expect them to be in year 3, then they can look at options to repay the entities that contributed for years 1 and 2. And that's why when we do budget these funds, we expect to budget them in a liability account to where we can expect to, and I can't say guaranteed because there's going to probably be a Prop 218 vote, and we can't predict that outcome. But presumably the GSA will be self-funded, and eventually they can pay back the initial contributions from all the member agencies.
And Mayor Hunley, may I ask, I think the other piece, just for context for all of you and for anyone watching on the show or here in the room, can you maybe also, Dan, just speak to again why it was important for local control and why not to just allow the state to manage this groundwater? I think it's just there's been a lot of work that's gone into it, and I think it's just important for folks to understand that why as well.
Right. So if the groundwater basin doesn't form its own GSA by July 1st, and of course I don't think it would happen on that day, but the state would come in and take control. And from what we understand, their measures would be fairly draconian just curtailment of basically demand, requiring all well users to curtail their withdrawal from wells by some percentage. And I don't think that's going to be healthy for anybody, particularly agriculture and the city. In the summertime, we rely on those wells to give us some extra supply during the very hot days of the summer. So that would be a scenario where the state could come in and take draconian measures. But I think their intent would be, okay, we don't want to keep doing this, form the GSA. And so there would likely be multiple attempts to get the GSA going.
I have two more questions, sorry. Is it typical, or is there some reason why it wouldn't be structured as a loan?
Well, actually, we looked at a number of loan opportunities. One, we looked at using the county as treasury as sort of a bank, but there were a number of problems in doing that. The county couldn't legally loan money for more than a year unless they had full control of the GSA, so that was pretty much a non-starter. We looked at commercial paper with a higher interest rate, and that option really didn't look like it would come together quick enough, and it held some of the same legal restrictions.
I guess I mean, why is the money the city of Sonoma is contributing not a loan that bears some amount of interest? That's
Yeah, that's.
I didn't hear it.
There's no guarantee that we would get it back. The money goes to fund this agency, and really they're working toward a Prop 218 ballot measure, which not a ballot measure, but basically a Prop 218 protest vote that would determine whether or not the GSA could impose fees on its beneficiaries.
So in the event that that's defeated, then the city of Sonoma is on the hook on
We-
an
we-
ongoing basis for paying for this.
Well, no, I think at that point the GSA would probably fail.
Okay.
The state would move in, impose draconian measures, and say, restart your GSA. And so I don't think it's like one shot and you're done. I think the GSA efforts would continue until there's some financial self-funding mechanism.
So based on the terms of the agreement as it's written, you would have the opportunity at that point to make a decision whether you continue to pay or opt out at that point. Withdraw, in other words. You have certain obligations when you withdraw based on the timing of the withdrawal, but you'd have the opportunity at that point to withdraw. I suspect if all of the agencies found value in continuing, even though your funding as opposed to the, I'll call them the ratepayers, for lack of a better word, funding, I think you could continue and continue to fund it if you found value in that funding for certain reasons like local control relative to land use and some other things that you may lose if a state agency steps in. The ability to determine whether or not you have enough water, those types of things. Overall, I think if the balloting, which is correct, a protest vote, fails, I think the opportunity will be before you to rethink it at that point. So you know you're committing at this point probably 2 years of funding to get it up and running. Subsequent to that, you'll find out whether you will get repaid and if not, how much of the ongoing cost you would still be bearing.
Okay, that's my last question. I'm sorry to take up so much time, but how do we know, since the budget isn't before us, that we can afford this?
So this would be coming out of water rates, the water fund, and there is reserves in the water fund to do that versus general fund, because this is really an investment in our water infrastructure and support for the water infrastructure.
Okay.
So going back to, I don't know, just like worst case scenarios, could you explain more the process if we want to withdraw and sort of what that would entail? And then also, if for some reason this agency gets sued, can they do a call to their members to pay for it if the agency can't afford it?
So as a joint powers agency, the idea is to insulate the member entities from liability associated with the debts and liabilities of the JPA. So the answer would generally be no, absent wrongdoing. I'm not sure what I'm trying to think of what their liabilities could be, because they are essentially a regulatory body. It's hard to know at this point until all of their rules and regulations are adopted what that would be.
Well, I was thinking if they tried to assess something against somebody and it was violated some other state law or constitution. That
Right.
Sort of thing.
Certainly, I suppose there is that possibility. But at this point, under the JPA law, there would be a insulation for the member entities based on that. And the agreement contemplates that that there will be an indemnity and insurance. That the JPA will hold its own insurance, so it won't be relying on the insurance of the member organizations. So withdrawal of members is contained in section 11.05 on page 13 of the proposed JPA agreement. It provides essentially that members wishing to withdraw have the ability to withdraw by providing 90 days written notice of their intention given to the board of the JPA. The second paragraph there, a member shall not be fiscally liable for the adopted budget provided that member provides written notice 90 days prior to the adoption of the budget. So that's that little timing thing you'd want to get out before the budget was adopted if you were not wanting to continue funding it. In the event of a withdrawal, the agreement shall continue in full force and effect among the remaining members as set forth herein. So just because one member agency withdraws doesn't mean it won't go on. Now, the costs obviously have the potential to go up if a member agency withdraws, but that would happen. You'd know what that was for those purposes when the budget and the request for funding came out.
And how, maybe you already said this, probably Dan, but as far as year 3, when they envision this being self-funding, what is the source of that funding?
It would be a fee assessment on well owners, including the city.
Okay. Are there any other questions? Thank you very much. I'm going to take it out to the public for public comment.
I have a question. So you gave a number of how many wells there are in the city, and then the city has a number of wells. How are they going to determine the fee per well? Because $97,000 is a lot of fee when you divide it up. Well, you said several hundred wells in the city, and then, of course, I mean, the city has its own wells, but so you have 250 wells. Do you divide that into $97,000? I'm just curious.
Okay, I can ask that question. I'll ask you after the end of public comment. Any further public comment?
Chris Petlock, 426 Napa Road, Sonoma. So as you all know, there's nothing more contentious in California than water. This is a great idea. As you all know, Sonoma is at the end of the pipe. The only way to get water is either down the aqueduct or out of the ground. I can tell you, working for the Valley Lume Water District for the last year, many of the complaints we got last year were local well owners with their wells drying up, with redwood groves dying because the aquifer had sunk so far down that the trees couldn't get any water anymore. This aquifer needs to be managed one way or another. Either we can have a seat at the table, the city of Sonoma and other agencies, and do their own thing to manage it properly, or the state's going to come in and they're going to manage it for us. I think having David Cook there is going to be a great idea. He farms in the valley. He knows where the problems are. He knows, he's been kind of involved with this process for a long time. So I think, having him there at the table will be a good place for this to get up and started and maybe avoid some of those challenges from agriculture, who will be the ones saying, I don't want to be metered, I don't want this to happen. So maybe he can help find some of those angles. And then funding, I know that, where I work at, we're writing for grants and so on to help mitigate some of the costs to the agency, year 2, year 3, and so on.
Thank you. Any further public comment on this item? Seeing none, I'll bring it back. And we had a question about how the cost will be divided amongst.
Right, I think there might have been some confusion. The contribution for first year GSA costs really is to pay staff time, mostly from the, at least the interim administrator, the Valley of the Moon Water District's executive director. There's finance staffing. There's legal staffing that has to be paid for, scientific staffing, grant writers, and so forth. Now, the fee structure that will be imposed on well owners, that's a little bit later in the game. First, sort of a rate study has to be developed to figure out what are the costs that are being incurred, including maybe some capital costs, and then it goes into a rate study to determine how do we divide those costs amongst all the ratepayers who would be generally well owners. So the $97,000 initial contribution has really very little to do with the actual fees that might be assessed. I don't know what those fees will be. That's really up to the GSA board and whether it passes a Prop 218 protest vote.
So one question that might help people understand is does the fee structure proposal as currently, and I say as far as we know as currently proposed, involve charging the fees to the de minimis users or only those who would be regulated?
The de minimis users would like, we can't say with all due certainty, but more than likely they would be charged fees, yes.
And so as far as the startup costs for the first 2 years, is there enough in reserves to cover all of that, or is that somehow going to be pulled out of the general fund or added to our current water bills?
There is enough in water reserves now to cover this.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Got it. Well, thank you. So we're back to the council for discussion and inaction. Councilmember Cook.
Well, I'd just like to start out by saying that I support this, and probably the number one reason is local control. If the city of Sonoma did not decide to be a player in this, it would go back to state mandate, and we would actually probably lose any seat at the table that we had. So my thinking is that in California, there's only one resource that's the most precious, and that's water. So I look at the GSA being formed at the local level with different partners will be a benefit to Sonoma. And when you look at the sphere of influence of Sonoma, that's one reason that we're burdening some of the costs with the Valley of the Moon and the other players. And hopefully, at the end, we will solve a huge problem that we have in Sonoma Valley and in the state of California, and that's with the groundwater. We have saltwater intrusion. We have a lot of different things going on. And if Sonoma doesn't have a seat at the table and not able to take care of that, we're going to have some major issues.
Councilmember Harrington.
I mean, I suppose in the presentation of this item, it has been presented almost as if it must be passed. I have some concerns about it. For example, fees to well owners that are de minimis users. That's people who have paid to drill their own well and maintain their own well, who are not able to access utilities like other people. And now, in exchange for maintaining their own private water system, we will be charging them for that. I think that is, certainly we have to regulate groundwater, but that doesn't make a lot of sense to me as a way to fund this agency. In terms of who might be on there, I think it is good to have a seat at the table since we are going to be imposing fees on ourselves. That makes sense to me. But the share of cost, given the size of our town and the number of wells that are here, seems disproportionate, and seems rather large for the amount of wells we have here that might be affected, excluding our own city wells. I suppose I will support it because of the timing, but I think it should be an ongoing dialogue and, sort of the same thing. People get solar and then PG&E can't afford to pay their bills because they're not making enough money off people, and they have to start charging them when they've done their, something to maintain their own energy system. It just strikes me as somewhat unfair to the small user. So I will vote for it because it seems necessary, but I have a lot of questions about the amount that we're paying and the amount that we're going to charge people.
Councilmember Agamonte.
I would like to ask a question of our Public Works Director. If you have your own, if you drill your own well, go to that expense. So could I ask a question? It's drilling into what? The aquifer?
Yes.
Okay, so that's common water. So that's part of the whole system. And it's, and I think it now makes sense to me. I know there's an issue with the fees, but if you're going into common water, obviously, some are going to use more water than others, and that could mean that's why the GSA is starting, so they can regulate people who possibly are not, going by the rules. So because it's a common aquifer, for me it makes sense to control this, because that's, even though you use your own funds to do that, you are part of an underwater system that's there for you to use, and I think there should be something for that. Thanks.
I do see your point, Councilmember Harrington, but I guess we'll have to wait and see how the discussion goes and how the fees are allocated, and it'd be my hope that it would sort of lean on the people who are the biggest users, but I think that's why it's good that we have a vote on this, even though well-wise where it might be in the minority, but we still have a lot of people that are going to be affected. So I am happy to support this, and also I think that Councilmember Cook will do a great job representing us, and Councilmember Agamonte when he's not available. So do we need to take action? Yes. 3 separate actions?
Yes.
Do we want to start with a motion? First motion. Anybody with a motion?
I'd like to make a motion to adopt a resolution approving the joint exercise of powers agreement, creating the Sonoma Valley GSA, and approving funding.
Okey-dokey. And B, I'd like to make a motion to adopt a resolution
Wait,
ratifying.
first we need a second on his,
Oh,
and then
sorry,
we'll vote on
second.
it, and then we'll go to the next one.
Thank you, second.
All right, we have a first, we have a second. Can I have a roll call, please?
Councilmember Harrington? Aye. Councilmember Agramonte?
Aye.
Councilmember Cook?
Aye.
Mayor Hunley?
Aye.
Thank you.
All right.
And
Do I have another motion?
through the chair, I'd like to make another motion, adopt a resolution ratifying the mayor's nomination of Councilmember David Cook as primary director and Madeline Agamonte as an alternate director to sit on the board of directors of the Sonoma Valley GSA.
And I'll second that.
Okay, can I get a roll call vote, please?
Councilmember Harrington? Aye. Councilmember Agramonte?
Aye.
Councilmember Cook?
Aye.
Mayor Hunley?
Aye.
Thank you.
And do I have one more motion?
And through the chair of the mayor, I'd like to make a motion to authorize the city manager to take all actions to effectuate the joint powers, exercise of powers agreement on behalf of the city.
Second.
Okay, can I get a roll call vote, please?
Councilmember Harrington? Aye. Councilmember Agramonte?
Aye.
Councilmember Cook?
Aye.
Mayor Hunley?
Aye.
Thank you.
All right. Next, we have council member reports and comments. Do we have any reports and/or comments? Seeing none, city manager. Nothing. Well, then we're going to take it back out to the public for one more public comment.
I'm Matt Metzler, and I agree with what was said earlier about people get up and talk about every issue. But I just didn't even think about this until tonight when I got here, because I didn't realize this until last Thursday. I just thought the city council should be aware. My wife works in Napa, and we go to dance classes twice a month in Napa, and so she does. The traffic is terrible, and so I take the bus. Well, you know that they're discontinuing Route 2025. Napa Transit is no longer going to be running the bus. And I thought the city should be involved in comment to the, they're having a hearing, I don't remember the date, somebody should go online and look at, to take public comments on that. I thought the city of Sonoma should make I think it's really important. We have a lot of people who are very isolated here in the valley. And, the bus, it only runs 5 times a day, but it is a valuable resource. There's usually only a couple people on it when I ride it, but for those people who don't drive, it's really important to have bus access to get out of town. So I just thought the city council should be aware of that and consider maybe looking into, I forget the name of the Napa Valley, they got something about a federal grant, a Napa Valley Transportation Agency, I think it's called. Anyway, I just want you guys to be aware of that, and hopefully the city council could take some action. Thank you.
Thank you.
Patricia Cullen, and this is actually why I came tonight. So I wrote a letter to the city council asking that you fund the establishment of a railroad district. And I think this is very important. It adds to the information that people have about the history of Sonoma. We aren't just a mission town, we're an early American town. And the railroad district is part of that history, and I think that it's extremely important, and funding it is important too. I'd be willing to help look for grants to fund part of it, but I think a commitment from the city council for the entire amount would be really wonderful. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Any further public comment? Seeing none, we will adjourn. Hey, we did it.
Underwriting is provided by Sonoma Paint Center, located at 815 West Napa Street. For more information, you can go to sonomapaintcenter.com. And Larbury Automotive, located at 18155 Sonoma Highway. For more information, you can go to larburyauto.com.